call your eating self-destructive when you use it to manipulate yourself or to create some certain feeling. Ideally, our eating would be for the purpose of nourishing the body and therefore the mind. The self-destructive habits are when we start to use food, for example, as a reward. Oh, I'll go exercise a lot so that I can then go and eat a lot of chocolate cake or something like that. Those are self-destructive habits. Those are things that are going to cause physical and mental problems in the long term, and sometimes even in the short term. If you're, we tend to be on automatic pilot when it comes to our eating, and unconscious is what I would call that. Oftentimes people can eat and they don't even realize that they've eaten, that suddenly they're finished, and they don't even remember what it tasted like or what they were eating. So that's a self-destructive habit, because what comes from that then is poor digestion. And when you have poor digestion, then your vitality or your vibrancy in life goes down, and eventually that affects that's your immunity actually, but it's also your blissfulness emotionally and spiritually. And so any of those self-destructive habits start to take down that vitality level. Some other ones would be eating too often, eating all day long, or grazing, or eating when you feel upset and just going and grabbing something and stuffing it in your face, or eating unconsciously, for example, standing up in the kitchen or while you're cooking. So these are things that are really quite destructive to you, again, because they disturb the digestive process, and so that food that's eaten doesn't digest well, and the food that comes right after that doesn't digest well either.
I know that I have friends who eat raw, and I see on Facebook they eat enormous salads, enormous amounts of fruit, and they think, oh, it's healthy, so I can eat an enormous salad, or I can eat 15 bananas. And so how is that self-destructive? Even though it's healthy, what's the...
Right. Well, it's defined as healthy because in the media today, and with using scientific studies as a method for deciding what and how you're going to eat, then it's understandable how one could think that that's healthy. But it's actually not very healthy, and here's the reason. Your digestive fire, or the energy that's available for you to digest food, is only so much. And eating 15 bananas or enormous amounts of salads and things, or enormous amounts of anything, is not going to digest well. The body's very good at telling us how much we can eat in any one sitting. And if we go beyond that, first burp or that first little belch that comes as we're eating, then everything that happens after that means that it's not going to get digested well. And it will result in weight gain and accumulation. The body, if you take 15 bananas and blend them up, and especially if you put them with something else, then the body still has to process 15 bananas, whether it's in a liquid form or whether it's in a solid form. So if you're going to have those kind of liquid drinks, you don't have more than you would eat naturally, because again, the body's not going to be able to digest it. Now, one of two things will happen. Either you will, by overeating in any one sitting, and that is that either you'll have accumulation, you'll have weight gain, and depending on your constitution, it'll be in one part of the body or another. Or some people, they will be able to eat enormous amounts of food and stay very thin, and then get thinner and thinner. And what happens then is usually there's either there's diarrhea or there's a constipation diarrhea pattern that happens with that. And that's an imbalance in the constitution, in the Vata dosha of the constitution as well, usually. Could be Pitta also. And so that person who seems to just stay thin no matter what, and they eat tons and tons of food, usually are going to head in the direction of disease, as we all do when we overeat in any one sitting. So recognizing that the body has the intelligence and will tell us what we need in any one sitting. Now, when it comes to raw foods, those are also a little bit harder to digest. So they actually require more energy to digest than a food that's been lightly cooked. So that in itself then starts to weaken the digestion, and then you give it large amounts of that food, and it becomes very difficult over time and results in imbalance.
Yeah, I've seen it's popular to do the blended drinks of, oh, this has got, not even exaggerating, 10 different vegetables and nuts and and greens. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen that a lot. And also, what about nut milk? Because I have friends who drink nut milk a lot all day, or they have it cold, they have it with their cereal. Mm-hmm. What about nut milk?
Yeah, well, nut milk is made from nuts, and the nuts are very dense, and then they're warming in their nature. Again, having anything in large quantities all day long is not a good idea. Usually that's no matter what it is, other than water, maybe a little bit of herbal tea. If you soak some almonds, for example, and you make nut milk out of the almonds, then that's fine, and you have a small amount of it. But you want to have it at room temperature. You could warm it if that was something you were inclined to do. But it is a nut, so it's extractive in its nature. Even as a milk, unless you've added something else to it, it still has more of that extractive quality than it does an augmenting quality, meaning it tends to draw things out of the body more than it adds or gives to the body. And so if someone is having, for example, nut milk often, and then is also having green smoothies, which could have any variety of things in it, those are extractive. What happens is that if there's too many foods being eaten, or too much of your diet in total is extractive in nature, and there's nothing nurturing and nourishing going in, meaning augmenting foods that add to the body, then you'll get anxious and start to feel more fearful and a little bit too light and airy, even though you may feel a little heavy when the digestion isn't very good. And that will it aggravates Vata dosha, and it tends to cause a little distortion in the mind. As Vata gets more and more aggravated, the mind becomes more and more distorted. And so it seems like a big leap from one place to another, but actually it's not as far as you think. If Vata is out of balance, and then I'm eating a lot of foods that are also increasing it, then it's easy to get there into a place of imbalance that leads to disease.
And I also think that people might be misled about nut butters, because I hear, people eat large amounts of nut butter. It seems light and fluffy when you eat it, but I don't think that people know about, macadamia nuts eaten in large quantities is toxic, and that the peels of almonds, I didn't know that, so I'm not sure if other people know that.
So macadamia nuts are not toxic, but cashews, raw cashews are toxic. I actually had someone recently who was having difficulty getting pregnant, and I've had this actually a couple of times, and had a couple of miscarriages very, very early on. And by stopping eating the raw cashews, actually, was able then to go ahead and get pregnant and keep a pregnancy going. They're toxic for everyone. They just need to be cooked. The skins of the almonds have some tannic acid in them, so it's just difficult to digest. So if you peel the almonds, they're much more easily digest. You'll get the nutrients. So when I keep talking about being able to digest the food, it means that then you can actually absorb and assimilate the nutrients that we're looking for. Because again, we tend to look at the food and say, oh, this food has all these nutrients in it, and isn't it so great? And it doesn't matter if I can't do anything with it in my body, in my mind. And the body really can only do two things with what we consume. It either transforms it into something we can use, which becomes part of our consciousness, or it becomes toxins in the body. And then we have to deal with it in a different way.
So how often would you recommend eating nut butter? And if you did, what would you eat it with?
You know, I don't really often recommend nut butter because most people tend to overeat it. But if it's someone who says, no, I don't have any problem with that, then, you know, a very thin amount, a very small amount, and it really depends on the constitution of the individual. If it's a person who doesn't have any problem with pitta dosha, then, meaning there's not too much fire in the body, then, you know, then to have it 3 times a week. And again, in a very small amount, but it really just depends on the situation. You know, you can use some and cook it in with some vegetables and things like that, if that's appropriate for the meal. But other than that, you know, better just to have the nuts, because with the nut butter, it's so easy to eat way more than you would eat if you were eating the nuts. And more isn't always better. As a matter of fact, often it's not at all. We really just look for that right amount, which is there's a nice range that's available to each of us each day, and what's an appropriate amount. And the way we know is by how we feel. And we shouldn't feel stuffed, and we shouldn't feel groggy after a meal. We should feel energized when we get up, not overstimulated, but just that we have good energy and we feel good and it feels like things went down well.